Well, my friends, we have a lot to get through today. After Pokemon Crystal, there was a bit of a lull of no official Pokemon release in North America. Nothing for the entirety of 2002, in fact, which is the only year since the 1998 Red and Blue release to not get anything. That's pretty crazy, really. But since we last left the Paraspective back in July of 2001, there were some major gaming events that occurred. The home console successor to the Nintendo 64 came out in November 2001, the Nintendo GameCube, which actually ended up selling quite a bit less than the N64 did. There were a few reasons for this, most notably due to its competition. Microsoft's first foray into home consoles was introducing the Xbox into stores, also in November 2001, which did indeed sell better than the GameCube did. And on top of that, Sony was already absolutely crushing both of them with the major success of the PlayStation 2, still the king of home consoles to this day. It's important to know just how successful the PlayStation 2 really was. If you combine the total sales of the Xbox and GameCube, then tripled that number, it's still less than the PS2's sales. That's ridiculous. But this episode is not about home consoles. We'll get there. I just wanted to bring that up because of where we are in the gaming timeline. What we are going to focus on today is Nintendo's handheld successor to the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance was already out in North America by the time Pokemon Crystal was released for the Game Boy Color, but Pokemon wanted to have their next set of games be for the new handheld system. It didn't seem like it made a lot of sense to release the expanded version of Gold and Silver on an entirely different system. So we get the Game Boy Advance in June of 2001. The GBA did quite well for Nintendo in sales actually, and I feel like this fact can be a bit forgotten. The Game Boy and Game Boy Color still outsold the GBA in the long run, but those revolutionized handheld gaming throughout the 90s. The Game Boy Advance was taking this into the 2000s with its introductory price of $99.99, a bit higher than the Game Boy Color's price of $69.99. But I mean, this was the next step in graphics and capabilities. Bigger screen, better resolution, better sound quality, better battery life. Still no backlight though, which sucks. But the Game Boy Advance really was more advanced in terms of specs. Content-wise, well, that's subjective. The last thing I want to mention before getting into the episode proper is where the Pokemon franchise was at this point. Like I said, there wasn't a single release in North America in 2002, so it was feeling like Pokemania was practically over. That's also up for debate, but 2001 really did see a bit of a decline in the Pokemon craze. The franchise certainly wasn't over, as Pokemon never actually went away, but the onslaught of the fad was feeling like it was. Kids that were 10, 11, or 12 when Red and Blue, the cards, and the anime started in 1998 were now 15, 16, and 17. Season 4 of the anime came and went, Johto League Champions, and the final season of the original series, Master Quest, started toward the end of 2002 and continued on until late 2003. At least the English version did. Movie-wise, the fourth film, Pokemon Forever, Celebi Voice of the Forest, did much, much worse in box office performance than Pokemon 3 did, which was already a steep drop from the first two movies. It is also important to know that Warner Bros. Released the first three, and now Miramax took over, putting this at a limited theatrical release. The trading card game kept on going though, with Neo Revelation out in 2001, Neo Destiny and the Legendary Collection, the re-release of the original sets, in early 2002, and then what is known as the e-reader era throughout the rest of 2002 and into 2003, Expedition Base Set, Aquapolis, and Skyridge, making the end of the Wizards of the Coast making Pokemon cards until the Pokemon Company took over. But, whew, now that we've covered all that, we can finally catch up to where we are in the Paraspective. Sorry about the long intro. What I'm trying to say is, welcome to Season 3, the Generation 3 era. So like always, Japan was months ahead with the next releases of games. November 21st, 2002 officially kicked off the Generation 3 era with Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire there, so it's not like 2002 was devoid of Pokemon gaming entirely. Once again developed by Game Freak, these were, of course, to bring Pokemon into the new gaming generation for the Game Boy Advance, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch to almost view these as remakes of Red and Blue. Rubies are red, Sapphires are blue, and the Game Boy Advance literally has Game Boy in its name, just advanced. I could have come up with a poem there, but that would have been super lame. It's kind of like a lot of Super Nintendo games having the word Super in their titles. These aren't old, boring primary colors of red and blue anymore. These are the glorious gems, Ruby and Sapphire. But even with the apparent decline of Pokemania, these new games did very well in Japan in 2002. They topped the holiday season in sales that year, so it was time to bring them over to English releases. Pokémon Ruby version and Pokémon Sapphire version were released in North America on March 19, 2003, April 3rd in Australia, and then July 25th in Europe. So per Paraspective tradition, let's check out these here boxes and pretend we're seeing them for the first time. As far as where music was at this time goes, play Into Club by 50 Cent to get in the spirit of the times. It was the #1 song that week. So nothing new here. The covers are keeping with tradition by showcasing either starting Pokemon or legendaries, and this is where we get our first look at the Gen 3 legendaries. The Ruby version has the red spiked dinosaur-like legendary ground-type Pokemon, Groudon, the continent Pokemon, over a shaded red background. What is gone from the cover is the slogan of "Gotta catch 'em all." With brand new Pokemon being released here, it was starting to feel like catching them all would be a bit of a daunting task. We'll get into connectivity, but this really was a new era. The Sapphire version showcases the counterpart to Groudon, Kyogre, the pure water-type Sea Basin Pokemon. Kyogre is very whale-like in appearance of blue and white with deep red lines throughout. So, like with Ho-Oh and Lugia being the cover Pokemon for Gold and Silver, they kept up with a legendary route here rather than the starters like with Charizard and Blastoise. And again, a very simple cover. It's Kyogre over a shaded blue background. That's it. The back of the box states, and we'll look at Sapphire first. Immerse yourself in the beautiful region of Hoenn, a place of masterful heroes and mysterious teams, of friendship and battles. So we start the series with Kanto, then there's Johto, now Hoenn. Got it. As the new kid in town, you set off on your journey as a Pokemon trainer. Who knows what wonders and dangers await you? Now it's time to grab your gear and head out on your own. So basically exactly the same setup as the other two games. Well, there certainly is a formula here. Over 200 Pokemon appear with over 100 new discovered species. You'll have to link up and trade with a friend who has Ruby version, or Sapphire if you have that one, to catch them all. Asterisk. You'll need a Game Boy Advance Game Link cable and 2 to 4 game packs when you link up to trade or battle, sold separately. Wow, okay, so over 200 Pokemon with over 100 new ones. Since there were 251 Pokemon after Gold and Silver's released, I'm thinking that not every Pokemon will be in this, and I'm not even a math person. But I mean, even the number 800,000 is still technically over 200, so what do I know? I'm no math person. And also the Game Boy Advance link cable, huh? I have a feeling these old Game Boy ones are about to be obsolete here. And 2 to 4 game packs, they're really dipping into the 4-player multiplayer aspect. 2-on-2 battles, use 2 of your Pokemon in battle at the same time. Oh, interesting. Boy, this really is getting to be advanced. Engage in intense multi-battles with up to 4 friends. So does this mean 2-on-2 with 1 Pokemon each? Or 1 versus 1 versus 1 versus 1? Or 4-on-4? I could do this all day. Pokemon contests let you groom your Pokemon to be the best of show. Well, if you're into the idea of dog shows, I guess. Best in Show is a pretty great movie. Stunning Game Boy Advance graphics display the world of Pokemon with more detail than ever. Yeah, this is to be expected. It better be if this is the advanced version. There are some differences between Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, such as how often certain Pokemon appear. This product can only be linked to the Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire versions. It is not compatible with other Pokemon versions or the Pokemon Stadium series. Oh, there it is. I knew it. This old Game Boy link cable can go the way of the scrapyard then. Same with these old stupid games. There's no use for them now. We're in a totally separate era now. So wait, if these can't connect to old games, and there are over 200 Pokemon here, does this mean there's literally no way to catch them all? Is that why the slogan is gone? Is Parasect not even in this game? Okay, let's look at the pictures. First, we get the Pokédex entry for a new Pokemon called a Skitty, the kitten Pokemon. It says, Skitty is known to chase around playfully after its own tail. In the wild, this Pokemon lives in holes in the trees. And underneath it says, catch new Pokemon, with 2 exclamation points. Alright, I will, just calm down. And yeah, Skitty looks pretty cool. The second picture appears to be the new 2-on-2 battle system. On the player's side is a level 5 Tailo alongside a level 10 Mudkip against a level 9 Torchic and a level 3 Zigzagoon. So yeah, just by the boxes alone, we are introduced to 7 of the new Pokemon. What's kinda cool is that the 2-on-2 picture for the Ruby box is the reverse. The player now has Torchic and Zigzagoon. And underneath, it confirms that these are the exciting 2-on-2 battles. Gameplay on the Game Boy Advance video game system. Basic reading ability is needed to fully enjoy this game, the usuals. There are also the pictures of the male and female protagonists, and yeah, they look very similar to the ones from Crystal. Crystal introduced the female player, so we can see that returns here. And finally at the top, only for Game Boy Advance with GBA link cable. I'm gonna miss you, Game Boy printer. Okay, let's for real get into the game and introduce ourselves to Generation 3 by checking out the Sapphire version. It starts with some dew on leaves, showcasing that these graphics and audio are really trying to be an improvement over the Game Boy Color. I personally love the simple GBC graphics, but the Game Boy Advance really is a nice fresh look at some new handheld graphics. The GBA is kinda like the Super Nintendo to the Game Boy Color's NES. Then we see one of the protagonists riding their bike as we are introduced to a couple new Pokemon. In fact, the first Pokemon we see is the Dragon Psychic type legendary Latias. Then it introduces Water Dark type Sharpedo and Pure Ghost type Duskull, about to go into a double battle against the players Torchic and Mudkip, which I'll get into shortly, leading into the title screen with cover Pokemon Kyogre in the back. It's not breaking any new ground here, but it is showing a double battle, kind of, in a dramatized setting. But then we get to see the start of this new game. Instead of Professor Oak or Elm, this time we have Birch, keeping with the tree theme for some reason. He shows us a new baby form, this time an Azurill, the baby form of Meryl, and then for something different, the game starts with you inside of a moving truck. You are not starting in an established home in town, but moving to a new house in Little Root Town, with the help of some Machoke movers. What's this guy doing? Come on. But this is the Hoenn region, based on the Japanese island Kyushu. Hoenn is known for a lot of elemental areas like deserts and rainforests, and a lot of water. And then for something else completely new, there's actually a father, and he is the gym leader. Crazy. Your mom is basically the same as the other two moms. So then you set the time, thankfully bringing back the awesome time clock from Gold, Silver, and Crystal, although unfortunately it really doesn't mean as much here. You don't actually see time changes in the overworld, and Pokemon will appear the same no matter what time of day it is. Also, setting the day of the week is gone as well. There are really only a few instances where the time even matters, so that kinda sucks. You are then told to go find Professor Birch to get your new Pokemon, and in yet another new twist from the formula, your rival is the child of Professor Birch. If you choose to play as a boy, your rival is May, and if you choose the girl, your rival is Brendan, and you don't get to rename them. But these are the two options for your character as well, so it's pretty cool that just like that, the two playable characters' fathers are the professor and a gym leader. The moms get to stay at home with the creepy Machoke walking around, but it's something. And in yet another twist from the formula, yeah, this game is really switching things up, you get to choose your starting Pokemon in a whole new way. Instead of ganking one off of a table, you find Professor Birch getting assaulted by a wild Pokemon and must choose one of the starters out of his bag to rescue him. But in sticking with the standard tradition that will carry over for the entire series in the main games, you get your choice of Grass, Fire, and Water. The Grass starter this time is a Trico, the Wood Gecko Pokemon. Trico is light green with a pink stomach, a darker green tail, and bright yellow eyes, and is based on the leaf-tailed gecko. The name Trico is a combination of tree and gecko. It evolves into Grovyle at 16, and then Pure Grass type Sceptile at 36. The Fire type is Torchic, the chick Pokemon. Torchic is orange with small yellow feathers. It is simply based on a chick, and also the Basan, a legendary fire-breathing chicken in Japan. The name Torchic is just a combination of torch and chick. It evolves into Combuskin at level 16, an underrated pun in my opinion, and then Blaziken at 36. And while all three Final Evolve starters in Gen 2 are pure types, some of these bring back the dual typing for their Final Evolve forms, like with Venusaur and Charizard. Blaziken is fire fighting for something different to the series. And finally, we have Gen 3's water representative, Mudkip, the Mudfish Pokemon. Mudkip is blue with orange star-shaped gills, a light blue tail fin, and a blue fin on top. Mudkip is based on the Mud Puppy, or Mud Skipper, and also the axolotl, as well as the gilled East African lungfish and the flathead catfish. The name Mudkip is a combination of mud and skip, just without the S. As far as the names go, the Gen 3 starters are very simplistic, and mostly combinations of two words. It evolves into Marsh Stomp at 16, and then Water Ground type Swampert at 36. As for me personally, the Torchic line is my favorite. Blaziken may even be my favorite Final Evolved Fire starter in the whole series, so I'll be taking Torchic for the sake of this video. You are then thrown into battle against a Poochyena, the Dark-type Bite Pokemon that eventually evolves into Mightyena. After defeating that, the game really begins. And also, per Paraspective tradition, kinda, we'll be going through the first main part of the game to see what is the different here. North of Little Root Town, Route 101, is where we find our first batch of common wild Pokemon. Poochyena, Zigzagoon, and Wurmple. Zigzagoon is the normal-type tiny raccoon Pokemon that acts as this game's Rattata and Sentret. Early game common normal types that evolve once, and in this case, it evolves into Linoone. Wurmple is the pure bug-type worm Pokemon that sort of acts like a combination of Caterpie and Weedle. Wurmple will randomly evolve into either Silcoon or Cascoon, and then Beautifly or Dustox from those. It's kind of an interesting twist there. North of Route 101 is the first new town, Oldale Town. Route 102 is to the west, and Route 103 is north, where you go fight your rival. Route 103 has both Poochyena and Zigzagoon, but another new one as well. Water Flying type Wingull, the seagull Pokemon who eventually evolves into Pelipper. Just like before, your rival will always take the starter that is strong over yours, but in a nice change of pace, your rival this time is meant to be more likable and friendly towards you. After defeating them, you are then given your Pokedex from the Professor and some Pokeballs, par for the course there. And it's here where I'll mention a new feature that will also carry over into almost every future release, abilities. Each Pokemon has their own specific ability that can affect battles or the overworld. These just happen and require no input from you. Torchic's ability, for example, is Blaze, which makes any fire attacks it uses 50% more powerful if Torchic has less than a third of its HP left. Zigzagoon's ability does not matter in battle, though. Pickup has Zigzagoon randomly pick up certain items while walking, like potions, full heals, or even rare candies. A common strategy is to walk around with a few caught Zigzagoon in the early game for this reason. It's a fun little addition to the game mechanics where you can learn and utilize different abilities for team building. You are now also given an absolute game changer of an item, the running shoes. Oh dear, wow, these are valuable. No longer are you forced to inch along through routes and caves. By holding B, you can sprint straight through. Yes, Gen 3 introduced a run button. So essential. Heading onward to Route 102, there are a few more Pokemon introductions. Poochyena, Zigzagoon, and Wurmple are the common ones, but there are two rare encounters. Pure Psychic type Ralts, the Feeling Pokemon, is here, and this is actually the only route in the entire game where you can find one. Ralts is kind of like the Abra of this game. Ralts evolves into Kirlia and then Gardevoir for its final form. But even rarer here is Surskit, the bug water-type pond skater Pokemon, eventually becoming Masquerain. But that's not all, oh no. Like always, Ruby and Sapphire have exclusives, and this is the first route where the encounter will vary depending on your version. Sapphire version has Lotad, the water grass-type waterweed Pokemon, who evolves into Lombre and then Ludicolo. Ruby version has Seedot, the pure grass-type acorn Pokemon who will become Nuzleaf and then Shiftry. So just like that, you have 8 options for a team just in the first few minutes of the game on the first 3 routes. 9 if you count both Beautifly and Dustox. Route 102 is also where you find the new types of berries. They mostly do the same thing as they did in Gen 2, but while Gen 2 had only 10 different types of berries, there are now 43 different ones, and you can replant them anywhere you find soft soil. Here you'll find P.E.K.K.A berries that cure poison, and Oran berries, which heals 10 HP. Once you reach Petalburg City, you'll see your first gym, except you can't fight the gym yet. But this is where you see your father, Norman, the gym leader. I think this is a cool little story addition. But this is also where you meet a dude named Wally, and just when you thought you managed to skip out on a tutorial for how to catch Pokemon, this game is going to disguise this as if you are teaching Wally how to do it. But you do nothing but watch as you supposedly learn how to yourself. It's like saying, of course I know how to crochet, but just so I know that you know how, why don't you show me? But after Wally catches a Ralts, your dad tells you to go to Rustboro City to take on the actual first gym leader, Roxanne, in a fitting parallel to Red and Blue with the first gym leader being Rock type. I don't really like that the first gym here is also Rock, but it's what we're given. But before we do that, we have to pass through Route 104 where we can find the new normal flying type tiny swallow Pokemon, Tailo, who evolves into Swallow. We saw Tailo on the box too. Normal flying is certainly nothing new, as there exists the Pidgey line, the Spearow line, the Doduo line, Farfetch'd, and the Hoo-Hoo line. Beyond this is the Petalburg Woods, and yeah, you can kind of see why these games could be seen as loose remakes of Red and Blue. They follow a very similar structure, and you can even view the new Pokemon as parallels to those. So this version of Viridian Forest now has ones you've been seeing, with some even more new appearances. Silcoon and Cascoon are now wild catches, much like Metapod and Kakuna were, and then we can also find pure grass-type Shroomish, the mushroom Pokemon. Yes, a brand new mushroom Pokemon acting as this game's Paras, who evolves into Breloom. But the rare encounter here is normal-type Slackoth, the Slacker Pokemon, who evolves into Vigoroth and Slacking. And it is here where you will meet the brand new team of evildoers, taking the place of Team Rocket. If you are playing Sapphire, you will encounter Team Aqua, a group of individuals who believe that the world should be virtually all water. Basically what happens in the movie Waterworld. On Ruby, you'll meet Team Magma, who has the opposite goal, in that the world should be all landmass. Basically the plot of, I don't know, The Day After Tomorrow? But these two teams are at odds with each other, both wanting to cause environmental warfare, a bit different from the goal of Team Rocket being that they want to steal and sell Pokemon. To be honest, I really do like these two teams. Wanting to flood the world has a nice James Bond villain type feel to it. Oh wait, that kinda is what Carl Stromberg wants in The Spy Who Loved Me. Man, I am always coming across these similarities between 007 and Pokemon. I love it. After this is when the game introduces how double battles work, and really they're pretty self-explanatory, but I do like them a lot. In this case, the first two Pokemon in my party go out for battle against the twin girls here. I then choose the option from the menu screen just like every Pokemon battle ever, but I can choose to use a move on either of theirs or the second Pokemon as well. There are some cases where this is beneficial. Then the battle plays out in descending speed order just like normal. But what's new here is that there are some attacks that can affect both opposing Pokemon, or even all three Pokemon on the field. Earthquake, for example, hits everything. Growl lowers the attack for both opposing Pokemon rather than just one. Once you get to know these, you can strategize it a bit more. And later on, you will be doing double battles alongside someone else, so you only control what your one Pokemon does there. And finally, the last thing I'll be talking about is the first gym battle against Roxanne. Rustboro City has its share of things to do, but rather than go over all of that, let's look at the gym and end it there. But just know that the game's story really kinda starts here. Roxanne opens up with an all too familiar face, a Geodude, which is literally the Pokemon that Brock opens with as well. But instead of Onix being her second Pokemon, we are introduced to another new one, pure Rock-type Nosepass, the Compass Pokemon. And with it being level 15, this is a decently tough battle, especially if you took Torchic. And that about does it for the first main part of the game. The story unfolds in ways that are pretty different from Gens 1 and 2, but it opens with a lot of familiarity to ease players into the GBA style. But really, there are a lot of gameplay elements that are upped here. There are over 100 new moves added, 135 new Pokemon, PC boxes can hold 140 more Pokemon, there are 77 different abilities, new Pokeball variants, just about more of everything. Weather now plays a factor in Pokemon battles as well, in keeping with the theme of Hoenn. Moves like Sunny Day and Rain Dance existed in Gen 2, but overworld weather now affects battles from the start. But the last main thing I want to mention is the big criticism that these games experienced. There is no way to trade between Gens 1 and 2. The Game Boy Advance can only connect to the Game Boy Advance, and at this point, these were the only games. So if you wanted older Pokemon that don't appear in this game, you are out of luck. But trading and battling between Ruby and Sapphire is still a thing with the GB8 link cable, where you can do other things too, like connect to make Pokeblocks to help your Pokemon win contests, or participate in linked contests as well if you're into that aspect of the game. I never did this myself, so I can't speak from experience. There is also the whole other thing of Pokemon Battle E-Series, where utilizing a peripheral to the GBA, the e-reader, you can obtain and scan in corresponding cards to fight other trainers and get berries. This is also something I never did. I do actually own an e-reader though, and a copy of Mario Party E, which is actually a really fun underrated Mario Party experience. But that's a topic for another day. And that mostly about does it for the main new features. You once again go through defeating all 8 Hoenn gyms, then the Elite Four, and the Champion. Nothing different there, other than the new Pokemon and characters. And rather than going through and describing every new Pokemon, I'm going to do a little video within a video here. These are my top 10 favorite Hoenn Pokemon. Number 10, Flygon, the Ground Dragon Mystic Pokemon. I'm not a huge fan of Dragon Pokemon, but I love its design with the diamond wings and red goggle eyes. Number 9, Lunatone, the Rock Psychic Meteorite Pokemon. I love the idea of both Lunatone and Solrock, but I like Lunatone a little bit more. Rock Psychic is such an awesome combination too. Number 8, Cacnea, the Pure Grass Cactus Pokemon. I mean, my favorite Pokemon is Sandshrew, so of course I'm going to like another desert-themed one of a cactus. Just a great-looking, stubby cactus Pokemon. Number 7, Gardevoir, the Pure Psychic Embrace Pokemon. I think I've mentioned this before, but I know the internet has kind of ruined Gardevoir. But I don't delve into that creepy stuff. I just like how it looks elegant and almost ghostly. Number 6, Blaziken, the Firefighting Blaze Pokemon. I already talked about Blaziken. It's my favorite final stage fire starter. Number 5, and if you watched my top 20 favorite Pokemon video, I've already discussed these. Watch that too if you want, it's fun. But number 5 is Metagross, the Steel Psychic Iron Leg Pokemon. It's fantastic looking and reminds me of the lair from The Spy Who Loved Me, and I've now brought up that movie twice in this video. Number 4, Rayquaza, the Dragon Flying Sky High Pokemon. Rayquaza is my favorite legendary Pokemon, and I'm rarely ever about the legendaries. The color scheme and design are top-notch. Number 3, Claydol, the Ground Psychic Claydol Pokemon. Ground is my favorite type, and I love the fascinating strangeness of Claydol. It gets weirder the more you look at it. Number 2, Duskull, the Pure Ghost Requiem Pokemon. Among my absolute favorite ghost types in the whole series. I just love the look of the glowing red eye behind a skull mask. Which means that number 1 is of course what it evolves into, Dusclops, the Pure Ghost Beacon Pokemon. While still not my favorite ghost Pokemon, Dusclops is my second favorite. There is a Cyclops Mummy Pokemon, just amazing. So in regards to my personal history with these games, I've mentioned this a couple times before, but yeah, I was no longer into Pokemon at this time, like at all. By March 19th, 2003, I had just turned 17 just a few days earlier. I was closing out my junior year of high school, and I remember that year in particular being a lot of work. If I felt like I was too old for Pokemon as a freshman, there was no way I was going to be caught playing Pokemon as a mature junior. Also, I really just didn't care anymore. I had sold all of my cards, I hadn't watched the anime in years, I didn't go see any of the movies beyond the first one, I had no interest in getting the Crystal version back in 2001, and I honestly had no interest in getting a Game Boy Advance even. At this point, I was playing a lot of Metroid Prime and Animal Crossing, and getting ready for the release of Madden 04, and my friends and I were really into Magic the Gathering. I would soon be trading in a lot of my old games, although I did keep my blue and silver version, as well as Pokemon Stadium 2, thankfully. So yeah, Ruby and Sapphire were completely off my radar. I can't remember when, but it was a handful of years later when I finally gave one of them a shot on an emulator and played through it. I don't remember which version or any of the Pokemon I used, to be honest. I don't even remember which starter I took. I did eventually buy the Ruby version, but it would be many, many years later. I mean like maybe 2019, when Shane and I went through and completed the entire Pokédex. It was at this point when I learned that counterfeit copies of these games are absolutely everywhere, and I found out the hard way that I did indeed have a fake copy of Ruby all along. I still completed the decks, but I made sure I bought an authentic copy of Sapphire to keep for good, which I certainly still have, and I kicked that fake copy to the curb. So even though I do indeed like these games, the nostalgia for them is just not there for me in the least. But I have learned to really love a lot of the Hoenn Pokemon. This may be a hot take, but I prefer the Hoenn Pokemon over the Johto ones as a whole. That's just a general statement though. They aren't all great, and Umbreon and Scizor are among my favorites from Johto. But I feel like if I were younger when Ruby and Sapphire came out, I would have been a huge fan of it.
Where's that Parasect?
Oh boy, everybody, it's time we find out where Parasect is in Ruby and or Sapphire. Parasect is not one of the Pokemon chosen to be in the game. Yeah, it's just not even here. And it's not like you can trade with any of the older versions to get one. So what the hell? What am I supposed to do for my mushroom fix? And don't say, Paraspectre, just catch a Shroomish. It's the same thing. No, don't even with that. Shroomish is nowhere near the same thing. Breloom is actually kind of cool, but don't test me right now. I'm not in the mood. That's the best compliment I can give it. But, my friends, there is actually a light in this dark, abandoned tunnel. You actually can get a Parasect in this game, just not yet. We'll come back to this in another episode, but for now, you are just going to have to suffer with whatever boring makeshift team you end up throwing together with what you're given. But just know that Breloom is no substitute for the Shroom King. But I still kind of like it. Reception-wise, Ruby and Sapphire were quite well received actually, getting mostly B grades with a few A thrown in. IGN even gave them a 9.5 out of 10. So even though the craze was pretty much over by this point, it's good to know that they were still putting out a good product. Ruby and Sapphire were, and still are, considered to be pretty beloved games, but not perfect by any means. There are many out there who grew up with or first started with Gen 3. Pokemon was still a presence after all. Which brings me to the sales. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire are actually the #1 best-selling games on the Game Boy Advance. This is, of course, adding both versions together, but the top 3 in sales on the system are actually all Pokemon games. Crazy. Mario Kart Super Circuit is in 4th, but even that is less than a third of the sales of Ruby and Sapphire. With that said, these did sell less than Gold and Silver did, and certainly less than Red and Blue. But still, over 16 million copies is no small feat. Perhaps Pokemon didn't really go away by this point, you just didn't hear about it as much. Kids were getting older, and younger players now had these new versions to check out. And I think this is why there is so many similarities to Red and Blue. These were meant to bring in new players, show off what the Game Boy Advance could do, and also be a new experience for veteran Pokemon fans. And thus, Generation 3 was underway. In regards to the Paraspective, we're gonna be here a while. The next 11 episodes are all before Gen 4 begins, so we have a lot upcoming on our plate. But next, we actually have a sequel to an old Gen 1 game, weirdly enough. In fact, it's a sequel to my second episode here. So join me next time as we sure play a mean pinball once more and go 5 months into the future to August of 2003. Paraspectre will return for Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire.